Hello and welcome to the Northwest Clean Energy Atlas Lunch and Learn. My name is Ruby Moore Bloom and I am a research analyst at the Clean Energy Transition Institute. Today I will be giving a brief introduction to CETI, an overview of the Atlas, and then a screen share tutorial. The Clean Energy Transition Institute, or CETI, is an independent, nonpartisan research and analysis nonprofit with a mission to accelerate an equitable transition to a clean energy economy in the Northwest. The Northwest Clean Energy Atlas is one of our research products. The Atlas, for short, is a CETI website platform that was launched in 2022. And it's a website that hosts interactive data visualizations relevant to deep decarbonization in the Northwest. The Atlas currently has visualizations in the 5 categories that you can see on the right side of the screen. So emissions, energy, utilities, equity, and jobs. And nearly all data used for the Atlas visualizations comes from publicly available data sources. And some of those key sources are listed here, also on the right. So we have data from the Energy Information Administration, the EIA. We have data from the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. We have US Census data. Our jobs data comes from the US Energy and Employment Report. And these are just some of the main ones, but we do have other data sources as well. The fact that these are all publicly available and free means that the data on the Atlas does exist elsewhere. But what makes the Atlas unique is the focus on the Northwest as a region and the careful curation of data sets from various sources, as well as the narrative text that we use to help people interpret this data. Most of the data sources we use are updated regularly, mostly annually, and so we attempt to keep our visualizations up to date as well. This depends on our available capacity at the time. And in the past, we've relied on critical support from CETI research fellows. We have had a partnership with the University of Washington. We've also had research interns, and some of our visualizations require coding and technical skills. So we really do appreciate the support from those partners who we've worked with over the years. All right, I'm going to transition now into a screen share tutorial and show you some of the visualizations on the Atlas and some of the tools you can use to interact with them. Switching my shared screen here. And now we should be seeing the Atlas website, which is nwceatlas.org. You can see up here in the URL. And when you first get to the home page, you see those categories I was talking about. We have the 5 categories here. And so that's one way to start exploring the visualizations. You can click on a category. But you can also scroll down and click View All Visualizations. And this will take you to a page where you can scroll through and see the preview image for each visualization, its name, and then some questions that that visualization tries to answer. So this is a good way to kind of see all that the Atlas has to offer. If you don't know exactly which visualization you want to explore, you can scroll through this All Visualizations page. There are also some additional resources on the Atlas. So we have an About page for a little more history. We have a glossary that defines a lot of the terms used throughout the Atlas. Join our community will take you to a page to sign up for the CETI newsletter. And then Tableau tips I want to show you. This is a page with some extra help for how to interact with these visualizations. So most of the visualizations on the Atlas are created with a software called Tableau. And this page will walk through a lot of the tools that I'll be walking through today as well, but it's a good place to reference if you forget about any of these, or if you just want to have a quick reminder. So again, I'll walk through these tools today, but this exists as a resource on the Atlas, Tableau tips here, or when we go into one of the categories, it'll be on the left-hand side. There it is, Tableau tips on the left. All right, I am going to now jump in to some of the specifics on the visualizations, and I'm starting here with the jobs category. So you can see that each category is listed here on the left, and each category has a home page with a little bit of information about this topic and about the data used. So in this case, I mentioned we use jobs data from the U.S. Energy and Employment Report, the U.S. EER or the USEER. And we have 3 visualizations in this category. We show energy jobs by county in the Northwest, by subsector, and then by year. I'm going to start with energy jobs by county. And before I jump into the specifics of this visualization, just to orient you to how the pages are set up. We always start with a title and a question that this visualization is attempting to answer. And we have the visualization itself, but then below the visualization, we also have a description that provides a little more information about the visualization and how to use section. So this will give you some information about how you can interact with the visualization. The sources for the data sources are always listed on the visualization itself in this little bottom section. And then if you scroll all the way down, you can also go to previous visualization or next visualization. And so this means that if you wanted to see all of the visualizations kind of in order, you could keep clicking next, next, next. It would take you through each of the categories. So again, these visualizations, most of them are created with Tableau. And so this one is Tableau visualization. I'm going to walk through some of the basic ways to interact with the Tableau visualization. And when we say it is interactive, that means that there are elements you can click on. There are ways to filter the data, ways to make it more useful to whatever research question or question you are trying to answer. So we can hover over the counties. That's one thing. You can always see more information when you hover over some of the elements on these visualizations. And then we also have these menus on the side where I can filter for specific states depending on what I'm interested in. If I have gone too far and I've made a mistake and I want to undo, I'm going to come to this toolbar at the bottom, and we have an undo button, redo if I've changed my mind yet again, I want to go back. And then if I want to just go back to where I started, the blank slate, I would reset, and that'll go back to the start. Let's say I have filtered for specific state and I'm interested in getting a sense of this data and maybe doing some data manipulation on my own. There is a download button here. And so I can download the image of what I'm looking at. I can also download it as PDF, a PowerPoint, a Tableau workbook, so different formats. And you'll see data is kind of grayed out. That just means you have to click into the area that you want to download. So I'm just clicking kind of in some blank space over here. Then I click download and then data. It'll let me download the data that is behind the visualization. So we have the raw data set, which is linked here. But if you wanted to get kind of the clean data set that's being displayed and maybe do some of your own calculations, that's how you would access that. Okay, let's reset, go back to the beginning. So one way that we might use this visualization is to ask what county in Washington had the highest number of fuel sector workers in 2024. And this whole visualization is showing 2024 data, as we can see here from the bottom. So I would filter for Washington. I'm curious about the fuel sector. And in terms of the subsector within fuels, I'm just going to leave it as all, but I could go into more depth. This is also a helpful way to see what is included in each sector. For example, if I'm curious what's included in energy efficiency, I could get that drop-down menu there. But let's go back to fuels. And then I have this option of jobs density. So that's jobs per 10,000 people in the county, or absolute jobs. In this case, it's actually not going to make a difference, but I'm curious about absolute jobs, just which county has the highest number of jobs. I can see this darkest county up here, hover over it, that's Whatcom County. I get a little bit of information about its population. And then the number here is 3,014 jobs. So that is the number of fuel sector workers in Whatcom County in 2024 from this data source, the US Energy and Employment Report. So that's just an example of how to use that data set. If I go back to the jobs category, if I wanted a little more information about the jobs in each subsector, I could use this visualization. This is what's called a tree map. And we see the boxes are bigger depending on, or bigger if they have more jobs in that subsector. And then the smaller ones are really helpful to use that hover feature so that you can actually see what subsectors they are because they're pretty small. Right now we're looking at all states, but if I wanted to just focus on Montana, for example, I can see that kind of ordering of the top subsectors change. And I could look at just one sector and see all the subsectors within that as well. This one also has previous year's data. So if I'm curious about 2020, for example, I could click into that, compare it to 2024 and see the difference there. All right. And then the last one is pretty simple, just a bar graph showing energy jobs by year. Going to move on now to the emissions category. The emissions category uses data sets from the EPA as well as the EIA. So we have one visualization that's kind of general Northwest greenhouse gas emissions. We have two maps that are showing point source emissions, so from large emitting facilities in the Northwest. And these top three are all from the EPA. And then this last one is looking specifically at emissions from electricity generation, and that's from the EIA, the Energy Information Administration. So one way I could use visualization in this category is if I had a specific facility that I wanted to know what their emissions were in a specific year. And so I could click into one of these maps and we'll let it load. Okay, so we can see our map of the Northwest. The circles are colored by the industry sector, and then the size is from the metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emitted per reporting year. And so I can see the reporting years here. If I wanted to go back in time and I was really curious about what happened in 2016, I can choose there. And then again, like I said, if I had a specific facility in mind, I can actually type that in here. So in my case, I'm curious about Ash Grove Cement in Seattle. And so I started typing it. I can click on it here and it just highlights it on the map. So I'm still going to have to go over and kind of hover over it. And then I get that information that I wanted, which is the total reported direct emissions in whatever year I'm looking at, in this case, 2016. I can go and use my reset view button and go back to the start there. So that's one example. Another example of a question we could ask with this category is if we're curious about how emissions from electricity generations differ between the Northwest states and between the Northwest and the rest of the country. So this is our only visualization that includes the rest of the United States. And we see the emissions rate, so the metric tons of carbon dioxide that are emitted per megawatt hour of electricity generated in each of the US states. Lighter is lower on that emissions rate and darker is higher. And so we can see that in general, the Northwest is a lot lower emissions rate than the rest of the country. And we can attribute that to the hydro system in the Northwest that provides non-emitting electricity. We can also see the historical emissions rate at the bottom here, and we can see it for the whole US, or we can specify one of the states that we want to look at. There's a tab up here, so some of the visualizations have multiple kind of sheets, and you can navigate to those by the tab. So if we wanted to just look at the 4 Northwest states in relation to one another, we would click here. And here you can really see the difference in Montana's electricity generation. It's really important to note with this visualization, though, that we're talking about electricity generated in each of these states, not consumed by each of these states. So the electricity generated in Montana, a lot of it gets exported to nearby states, a lot to these other Northwest states. And so this higher emissions rate is just the electricity generated in the state, but not necessarily consumed in the state. This one might be one that you want to do some of your own calculations with. So again, we have that download button, and again, just make sure you kind of click into the area that you want to download, and then it'll let you click that download data. All right, I'm going to move on now to the energy category. We have a lot of visualizations here, and most of them come from the EIA. So we have the first 6 all come from the EIA SEDS dataset, which is the State Energy Data System, SEDS. And we have information about state energy flows, energy resources and uses, kind of in different categories. And then specifically looking at resources used to produce electricity, and then also looking at generation from wind and solar. So those are all from the same data set, the EIA SEDS. Then we have a couple maps looking at electricity capacity and generation. And then finally, we have a data set from the US Census, from the American Community Survey, looking at what type of heating fuels are used to heat households in the Northwest. So a couple ways we could use visualizations in this category. We might want to know about a state's one sector in a state and kind of how the energy sources are broken down. So for example, if we're curious about Oregon's commercial sector, would choose Oregon there, and then commercial energy there. And I can see the breakdown of electricity versus natural gas, petroleum, biomass. And then again, these smaller ones, hovering over them will give you that extra information there. This SEDS data set goes back all the way till 1960, so you can actually choose any year from then until now in the drop-down menu here, and then you can also see the historical change in the bar graph on the bottom. And so that can be helpful for getting that big picture kind of change over time view. If I reset, maybe I'm just curious about one state's energy use over time, but I want to see all of the sectors, or again, if I want to just look at one sector, I would be choosing that here. All right, another way we could use a visualization in this category is if we are curious about a specific energy generating resource and a specific power plant. So here we're seeing a map of the Northwest. Each of the dots are colored based on the resource type for electricity generation, and then the size is based on their nameplate capacity. So maybe I'm curious about what was the largest natural gas plant in Montana in 2023, and this whole map is for 2023. Just by looking at it, I can tell that natural gas is this color, this kind of light yellow, but it's really hard to tell within Montana which one is the largest. And so I can filter first for Montana. It's still a little hard to tell because these are all relative to the other resource types. And we see a lot of hydro. We see some large nameplate capacity from the Colstrip coal power plant. And so a trick that I can use is I can click on the resource down here, the one that I'm interested in, and then click keep only. And now I've kind of got rid of all the other noise and I'm just looking at natural gas. And then I can hover over them. It looks like this one is the biggest, Dave Gates at 203 megawatts, but I could check the others just to be sure. And yeah, that would be my answer if I'm curious about the largest, by capacity, largest natural gas generating plant in Montana. And you can, repeat that with any combination of state and resource type. If you had a specific plant in mind, you could also type that in here, similar to how we did in the industrial emissions map. Some of them are going to be really small. Again, that's because of the way the scale is relative to all of the other power plants, but it can still help. It just highlights them on the map so you can find them a little bit easier. All right, the last one I wanted to show in this category is this heating fuels one. And again, this is using data from the US Census, so the American Community Survey. And we have a map of the Northwest on the top and then some extra information in bar graphs on the bottom. So one question I could ask here, for example, is what percentage of housing units in Ada County, Idaho, are heated with natural gas? So that might be my question. So I'll start by filtering for the state, Idaho. And then I might not be up to speed on my Idaho geography. I might not know where Ada County is. And so I can use this search function and type in the county I'm curious about, and then that'll zoom me in. And so I can maybe zoom out just a little, but I did catch that one is Ada County. Okay, great. The information that I'm getting in the little hover text box says the county's name. It also includes the percentage rural, and that is just based on the number of census tracts within that county that are classified as rural based on, here it's in the source, but based on the rural urban commuting area codes through the USDA. And we've classified anything as of 4 or greater as rural and anything below that as urban. And so the percentage, again, is the number or the percentage of census tracts within that county that are classified as rural. And there's a link here to learn a little bit more about that methodology. The tooltip, this pop-out box is telling me the percentage of housing units heated with electricity, because that's the heating fuel I have selected here. But I'm more curious about natural gas or utility gas. So I'm going to change that there. Then my color scheme changes. I'm looking at the percentage heated with utility gas, with darker being closer to 100. And so I can see that 69% of the housing units in Ada County are heated with utility gas. So that would be my answer to that question. The bar graphs on the bottom are also connected to the choices you're making up here. So for example, if I choose a different state, you can see those bar graphs just changed. And so these are all connected to the state you have chosen here. And they're even connected to the county. So for example, if I want to know about all of this information for King County in Washington, I can click on that county, and then you could see all of these just adjusted. So now we're looking at the heating fuel in King County, number of units in structure in King County. So we can see the majority are single unit detached, but there's also quite a lot of apartments with 10 plus units. And so that's that extra information you can get in hovering over it. You can see that's 20 total in King County. And then you can also see the year built. Again, hovering over to get that percentage. And then we can reset and redo that with any combination of the heating fuel or state or county to get at the research question that you are looking for. Okay, moving on to utilities, our next category. The data here comes from reported data to the EIA So national reported data by utilities. And then there's also some data that the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality and the Washington Department of Commerce require utilities serving those states to report. And so the Northwest Electric Utilities Overview includes data for all 4 Northwest states, but the last 3 are just for Oregon and Washington, just due to data availability. So starting with this first one, a pretty basic question we might ask, and actually I'll pause before asking the question, just to explain this visualization, which has a lot going on. We are seeing the electric utility service territories in a map up here, and they're colored by the utility type. And I can choose not to see them all. So if I'm actually only curious in investor owned, for example, I could uncheck the boxes for the others. And now I'm just seeing the service territory of the investor owned utilities. And if I want to see everything again, I can use that reset view button and go back. I can also choose a state here as we've done before. And then if I wanted to highlight a specific utility, let's say Eugene, I can click on it there and then it's highlighted. And I can hover over it and get a lot more detailed information, such as the number of customers, the total sales in megawatt hours, the average price, which is an average across residential, commercial, and industrial. But then I can also get that price detail, which is divided out by residential, commercial, and industrial. A question I could ask of this visualization, just kind of at a pretty high level, simple question, is across all Northwest states, which electric utility company has the most customers? And so I can go to this list at the bottom. Right now, the utilities are ordered in terms of customers, and so Puget Sound Energy is there at the top. That would be my answer for that question. And for the utilities that have customers in more than one state, we can see those colored by state as well. If I wanted to instead order the utilities by total sales, instead of customers, there's a little bar graph that pops up next to this, and I can click that, and now it's ordered by total sales. Puget Sound Energy is still the top, but some of these other ones have shifted a little when I go between total customers or total sales. So depending on if you're, asking what is the largest utility in terms of sales or in terms of customers, you can play around with that. You can also adjust by average price. Again, this average is across residential, commercial, and industrial. And to get more detail on that, you would go up here to get that price detail. This visualization is showing all Northwest, and then we also have tabs for each of the states. So for example, if I wanted to just take a look at Oregon, now we have some maps that are not overlapping in the same way. They actually divide out the utilities by type, so we can get a bit of a different view there. And then we have the same information on the bottom, the total customers, the total sales, and the average price. All right, back to the utilities category. We can take a look at the electric utilities fuel mix. And again, this is just for Oregon and Washington at this point based on data availability. And one question we might ask is what percentage of a utility's fuel mix in 2023 came from a specific resource? So we can see right now we're looking at all utilities in Oregon, all electric utilities in Oregon, but let's say I'm really curious about one in particular. I'll go with Eugene again, EWEB, and I can see that a large percentage, 82%, is from Bonneville Power Administration, and then we have some additional resources here as well. The Oregon data presents energy resources from BPA as their own category, but the Washington data has those energy resources divided out based on what resources they actually are. And so there will be no BPA category in the Washington data, but there is in the Oregon data. And that's explained in the notes here. We can see what the fuel mix was. It was 78% hydropower, 11% nuclear, 10% unspecified. And so this is the breakdown that Washington used to divide out those BPA resources. All right. That's it for utilities for now. So I will move on to the last category, which is called equity. And this category came about from a report that CETI put out a few years back called Community Defined Decarbonization. And as part of that report, we developed some quantitative analysis around energy burden and other socioeconomic indicators. And so those maps are shown here. And I'll start with this first one, which is showing a community level relationship between poverty and energy burden. And this sometimes takes a second to load. If it is seeming to take a long time, you can try refreshing the page. And sometimes that gives it a little nudge. There we go. The big difference here, just in terms of interacting, is that right now we are using ArcGIS instead of Tableau for these maps. And so there's just a little bit of a few new tools to learn for using this new software. So one thing is that the legend is not always visible, but you can click here to see that legend. That's really important. And then some of those other CAD are available down here. Home will take you to this home view, zooming in and out. For example, we can go full screen, and then you can actually visit this in ArcGIS if you prefer. So these maps, all of the maps in this category show this community level relationship. And I want to walk through what that means. It's not always intuitive. This map is called a bivariate map, so it shows two variables at the same time, and this legend shows us how those are indicated in the data. So we have energy burden, which goes from low to high, and it's low on the right and high on the left in terms of this legend. And so that means that all of the values here are on the lower end of energy burden, and all of the values here on the higher end. And then we're comparing that, or we're combining that rather with the percentage of individuals that are at or below 150% of the federal poverty line. That's what we're using to indicate poverty. And that goes from low on the left to high on the right. So this means that our dark green above is relatively high energy burden and relatively high poverty. The white is relatively low of both. This blue over here is relatively low energy burden, but relatively high poverty. And conversely, this kind of brighter yellow-green is relatively high energy burden and relatively low poverty. You don't have to memorize all of these relationships, because when you're actually looking at a specific census tract, you can click on it and it'll give you those values. So here we see the state, the county, the GeoID is referring to the census tract ID. So if you're doing any type of data analysis that you want to match GeoIDs between census tracts, that can be helpful. And then we get those values of percentage that are at or below 150% of the federal poverty line and the energy burden value. This map also has the ability to search. So if I am curious about a specific place, I can type that in here. So for example, maybe I'm curious about Sandpoint, Idaho, and start typing that, find it there. It'll zoom me in. And it shows me the county name once I'm a little more zoomed in. And then these are all census tracts. So I can click around and get that specific information for each of these census tracts here. All right. That is it for a quick walkthrough of these visualizations. We welcome any feedback, any questions at any time. Thank you so much for your interest in the Clean Energy Transition Institute and our Northwest Clean Energy Atlas. And again, please feel free to reach out with any comments or questions about this project. You can do so here. You can sign up for the Clean Energy Transition Institute newsletter, and you can also share your feedback with us on the homepage here. Thank you.